Salams, this is the daily debrief coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani, and on the show today we're talking about mass protests in France against the government's plans to increase retirement age by 2 years. We also look at happenings from the Belmarsh tribunal in Washington, D.C., and who will become New Zealand's next Prime Minister after the resignation of Jacinda Ardern. First up, over 1 million people, even by the most conservative estimates, joined a day of protest and strikes, bringing together trade unionists, civil society organizations, and feminist and health collectives in united opposition to Emmanuel Macron government's plans to raise France's retirement age by 2 years to the age of 64. There were demonstrations in Paris, of course, with the CGT union putting the number of marchers at the biggest gathering at over 400,000. This biggest of marches took place beginning from the Place de la République, a monument dedicated to the French Republic and a popular gathering point traditionally for protesters. Over 200 other cities, including large cities such as Nantes, Lyon, Bordeaux, Marseille and Toulouse, joined in as train drivers, public sector workers and refinery staff walked out. The strikes severely disrupted public transport and many schools were shut. Buoyed by the success of the action, the unions have called for another day of action on the 31st of January. Anna Vracha joins us now for more details on these protests. Anna, not unprecedented numbers in terms of the people who mobilized across France in these protest marches, but still significant numbers. The CGT saying over maybe close to 2 million or more. Give us the highlights of the events as they took place and the key aspects of what protesters are demanding.
Well, essentially, it has a lot to do with the reform that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is proposing to go forward with, and this would increase the pensionable age, so people would be expected to work 2 years more than they are now. So bringing it from 62 to 64. And, there's been quite a bit of talk what this implies and what it would mean for different profiles of workers. So we know that, of course, it's not the same thing to work 2 years more in a managerial role compared to, driving a train or delivering post. So that's what the people have been mobilizing about. It's about their working conditions already being so bad to impact their health and now being forced to actually consider working for 2 years more. And as you said, the numbers were pretty high. There were protests in most cities in France. The estimates they differ, but the Trade Union Confederation said that. Essentially, there were closer to 2 million people marching around in the country, and up to 500,000 people, I think, in Paris only. So it was quite mass. It was also quite important because it brought together different trade unions. It brought together different kinds of initiatives. So, across sectors were striking. There was a collapse of public transport in the north of France. So there were not any trains running at some points of time. So it's really something that has touched upon the lives of many people's lives, and that people in France feel very strongly about. So they have already announced a second phase of a second strike for the 31st of January. And as the trade unions have warned, if Macron is, if he insists to go on with the reform, the protests are definitely, they're sure that the protests will escalate and that they will actually grow in numbers and action.
Right. 31st, like you were pointing out, Anna, the next day of the call. What's been the immediate response from the government before we go on to touch on the specific aspects of the health of workers that you were mentioning earlier?
From what I've heard from trade unionists, it's not the acceptable response. It's not an acceptable response that they're getting. So it's mostly still, in general terms, dismissive of what the trade unions are asking, of what the workers are asking, and it's actually, the usual attempt to shift the focus on something else and not actually talk about the roots of the problem, which are not workers working for too short. It's the quality of the work that they're doing, and actually whether in this in the middle of a very problematic winter in Europe, where energy costs are rising and generally costs of living are rising, that people are being treated as scapegoats, and that they're supposed to take on all the weight of these problems that they're facing. Yeah.
And that has to also show up in terms of, I mean, we're still kind of grappling with fully understanding the impact that the pandemic has had on public health in Europe specifically. But going beyond that, I mean, even the health sector, I'm sure, is mobilized as it has been consistently over the past few weeks and months. So just expand on that element a little more, particularly for those who work, like you were mentioning, in more blue collar jobs, whether it's delivering post or in those kind of positions.
Well, as I mentioned, the protests saw a high level of support. So there were not only trade unions marching, but there were also civil society organizations and people's initiatives joining them for the manifestations. And a big part of those came from the health field. So we had a group, of trade unions who organize workers in health and social care. We had a platform of initiatives like the People's Health Movement in France, the collective Our Health is in Danger, who all pointed out that the reform is not only about the pensions, of course, but it actually can impact the lives of people much, much more. So, it's also about the health of people. It's also about the condition when you retire, in what condition are you retiring in. So it's also about the status of your health at the end of work. Let's put it that way. So, and that's been raised as a major issue by these collectives, because they're saying that in case the reform goes through, we're going to see inequalities expand that already exist. So starting from very, very basic indicators like expected duration of life. We see that people in France who are in managerial positions, they live years longer than those who are working blue collar jobs. So this is only certain to expand if the age of retirement is raised, and they're saying that it's really a health issue, so that these kind of organizations should back the opposition to the reform.
Anna, thanks again for your time today. On Friday, the 20th of January, progressive groups in the United States of America hosted the third Belmarsh tribunal in the US capital, Washington, D.C. The 17-member tribunal is hosted by Progressive International along with the Wow Holland Foundation. I quote now, "From Ankara to Manila to Budapest to right here in the United States, state actors are cracking down on journalists, their sources, and their publishers in a globally coordinated campaign to disrupt the public's access to information," end quote. Those were the words of co-chair and Democracy Now! Host Amy Goodman during the opening remarks at the National Press Club. The Belmarsh Tribunal, I continue to quote now, "pursues justice for journalists who are imprisoned or persecuted, and publishers and whistleblowers who dare to reveal the crimes of our government," she said. The DC Tribunal was held, as I was just mentioning, at the National Press Club, not very far from the US Capitol building, where Assange first screened Collateral Murder over a decade ago. The video shows 39 minutes of unedited, leaked footage from a gun cam that shows the US military attacking Al-Amin al-Thaniya, a suburb of Baghdad, and killing 12 civilians. Assange has been persecuted and incarcerated almost ever since. Anish joins us now for more details on what actually happened at the tribunal. Anish, you've spent a good part of your Saturday listening to testimonies as well as evidence presented at the Belmarsh Tribunal, comments coming in from the members of the tribunal, of course. It's not an easy task given how little time we have, but at least give us some of the highlights of the testimonies and what we heard at Belmarsh Tribunal.
Yes, so this would be the third time that the tribunal is convening, and the second time in the United States itself. And it is happening, like the most significant part of it is that it is happening in DC, It's happening very close to the US Capitol building, which houses the Congress, the presidential office, the Supreme Court as well. And so this whole, it may look like a conference, but the whole point of this thing is to shore up solidarity for Assange and also to scrutinize US war crimes. And it has done so, like it did in the past two sessions in London and New York. And in both these cases, we actually saw quite a detailed set of testimonies happening about, and most of that is related to the war crimes that Assange or WikiLeaks had exposed earlier. So these factors also combined with the fact that Assange is right now on pretty much the last leg of his extradition process in London. I'm giving this background because it's absolutely necessary to see where this tribunal is coming from. And so, considering the fact that it is happening at the very last, the fag end of this whole, extradition process that is happening in the United Kingdom, where Assange is now fighting in the courts for the last appeals, it is quite important that public figures of the stature that have appeared for the tribunal do come together and speak up on the matter. In the case in the tribunal yesterday, we actually saw major. It's not really things that we do not already know. A lot of us who have been following international news, or for that matter, anybody who has been privy with the progressive sections of reporting, but in many ways, these are not facts that are quite widely reported on the media. On one part, there was a entire part where speakers talked about, members of the tribunal talked about the lapses, procedural lapses that happened throughout the trial that Assange had to go through, fighting against the US extradition attempt, and which includes, as we have repeatedly pointed out in this channel as well, subversion of several, legal and judicial processes, not only by the United Kingdom, but also the United States. And so in these factors, we saw various testimonies that were essentially repeated. But obviously, you do not see the sort of reporting that does happen when, in mainstream media. There is also, talks about the recent attack, provocations that have been happening against China in the East Asian region, the sort of war lines that is being drawn after the Ukraine crisis blew up, and the manner in which nations have were pushed to essentially take a stand, even though it has been at the detriment of their own national and sovereign interest. And so these factors were discussed. We also saw how the U.S. War machinery has been operating and continues to operate with the same kind of energy under the Biden administration as it did in the previous administration before that Assange had exposed. So all of these factors, all of these matters have been, were presented to the public by members of the tribunal. And it is essential because when we obviously talk about Assange, we have to talk about US, not only US war crimes, but imperialism in general and how it has affected the times that we live right now.
Thanks for that update, Anish, and we'll ask you, of course, to continue following the Assange story as it progresses. As you were pointing out, an important one for all of us around the world. And we'll ask you also to stick around because we're talking about New Zealand next. We'll be back with you in just a minute. And finally, after nearly 6 years heading the New Zealand government, Jacinda Ardern has resigned from office, saying she no longer has enough gas in the tank to keep doing the job any longer. Labour's Chris Hipkins will now most likely take office and lead his party towards a very difficult 2023 election. Anish is still with us and has more details on this developing political story. Anish, after almost 6 years, like I was just saying, Jacinda Ardern has resigned as Prime Minister. What happens next for government in New Zealand?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because in many ways this was, as many media headlines have rightly pointed out, it's a shock resignation because just months ago, like barely in November, we had Arden talking about wanting to stand again for to serve again another term as the prime minister, and so definitely. The kind of announcement that she made last week was something that nobody expected. So in this case, we are not sure where it is headed. But the fact that a large, the massive dip in popularity, the massive, if not anger, but kind of discontentment among the New Zealand people over government's many failures in the past few years, at least on the domestic front, have caught up to them. And obviously, this resignation is part of that. So the person who comes next, which is Chris Hipkins, will have to do quite a lot more to actually shore up the confidence that they had in 2020. We should remember that in 2020 they won for the first time since the 30s. The Labour Party won over 50% of the votes, and in the proportional system, that gave them a clear majority to lead the government. But right now, they're not in a position to think of another term with a majority, and not just a majority, maybe not even a plurality of votes in their favor, if we go by some of the opinion polls at the moment. So the current government's big responsibility comes with the fact that they have to actually not only show that they are ready to mend some of the mistakes or downfalls of the government, but also make sure that the people are confident enough to elect them again in October this year.
Right, yeah, like you mentioned, not too much time. So, where does that leave us in terms of the elections, and what are, like, if you can get into a little more detail about the state of labor essentially in New Zealand after that the 2020 win?
Yes, so it is going to be quite a difficult year for Labour right now because obviously the candidate that they have chosen, the only nominee to be to be named in the current leadership process, shows that they have gone for the safest candidate, which is not necessarily the best thing to do if you want to gain confidence, especially at a time when you are falling quite behind your own opponents, the more conservative and right-wing opponents, so to speak, who have very confident leaders, who have people, a very loyal voting population as well, a constituency as well. So this is not something that the Labour can right now boast about. Their whole process for the next several months, over 10 months time, or less than 10 months actually, is to pretty much undo some of the unpopularity that they have garnered, primarily because they were unable to contain the housing crisis, the housing affordability crisis that has been going on in New Zealand for decades now, and which was only worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic. That. Secondly, there is the general discontentment about the recession that has fallen in with rising unemployment and rising cost of living. The government has been unable to contain it in the manner that people would want to. Obviously, New Zealand is faring, slightly better than most, developed nations right now, but that doesn't mean that there is a widespread, frustration among the general population over the conditions that they are being pushed into right now, despite the welfare measures that came in the last budget. So with the coming budget, the government has to the task is cut off to make sure that the people regain that confidence that that they previously had in 2020. But also, obviously, there is a fact that the clear majority that they gained in 2020, and without any coalition partner that would put them in check, they obviously went ahead of themselves in many ways.
Yeah.
There were obviously instances, especially like if you look at the fact that the kind of border controls that New Zealand imposed were some of the strictest during the COVID-19 pandemic, which actually separated several families. There were also issues of Maori land being, there were contentions on many of these cases on Maori autonomy, on welfare programs aimed at them. There is also issues about some of the police reforms that they implemented, which actually militarize the police further rather than bring down the sort of police violence. It actually gave police far more surveillance and policing, or more intrusive policing mechanisms at their hand. So obviously that has also affected some of their progressive constituents. So that shows that the government really has to do something to balance these factors, or at least undo some of these factors. And the fact that there was nobody to contain them or control them in these situations, none of the progressive partners earlier could do that in the parliament, made them do the sort of things that might be unpopular among their own voters. So this is something that they have to obviously mend. We do not know if they will go for that, because we are looking at a candidate who only does a balancing act, who's known for that, and who's known for being the safe option. So we have to wait and see how he acts now, considering the kind of task that he has, the uphill task that he has in the coming elections.
Whether, first of all, he can secure the support of his party itself. All right, thanks very much, Anish. We'll leave it there for today. And with that, we also bring to a wrap this weekend episode of the Daily Debrief. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for more details on these stories and all of the other work we do. Also, don't forget to follow us on the social media platform of your choice if you haven't done so already. From me and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thanks very much for watching. We'll see you on Monday. Until then, goodbye.